Hey folks, I'm Bryan Paul Rees, scenic artist at WhiteMetalGames, and we're making this video today to show you the essentials, as in supplies, to making terrain or dioramas, display boards, or any scale models really. I'm going to start with the essential tools you're going to need. Just first and foremost, an extending blade like this. I prefer one where the blade actually locks into place on the back piece here, and that guarantees that it's never going to get pulled through the front there. When you buy these, they usually come with a few extra blades. Just go ahead and buy an extra pack of blades on top of that, because you can get around using a hot wire foam cutter if you always have fresh blades. And in my opinion, you have more control and can manipulate whatever you're working with more with these. So those are a must. For the finer cutting work, X-Acto Knife for all your hobby needs. Some snips, these always come in handy. Miniatures or terrain. A builder square. I can't stress how important it is to get right angles when you really need a right angle. Don't try and guess it. Let this tell you what the right angle is. Or if you want a square, this is how you do it. Don't trust your eye. It's also good to just have and measure like different dimensions so you don't have to keep moving a ruler back and forth like that. This little sandpaper. This is a 120 grit. I usually have a 220 laying around, an 80 or a 60. You know, just different, you got your coarse grit and your fine grit. Maybe 3 different types. I have a vise here, vise grip. These usually come in 2 or 4 packs. They're really good for when you're using things like expanding foam or Gorilla Glue or anything you're gluing together that can move while it's setting. These are really great to just make sure it doesn't move. A spackle knife. These usually come in 3 packs. This is the cheapest kind. You can get it in any hardware store. It's plastic. It came with this size, a slightly bigger size, and then a huge size. So you could do anything from small, small pieces of terrain to giant boards. And then this is one of the most important pieces a terrain maker can have. This is just a rock from a parking lot. Let me explain that. At some point, you're gonna wanna get a texture. Like for instance, let's use this foam. This is just regular blue-green insulation foam, 1 inch thick. The sides of it that have been cut really hold detail. And I'm gonna hold this right about here so it stays in focus on the above camera there. But when we press into it and kind of twist, it starts to crack, it starts to give way, and it actually starts to, the texture of the rock itself starts to rub off on the foam. So these are always good to have for when something looks a little too symmetrical, a little too man-made, and you want it to look more natural or weathered. Just bash it with a rock. And we're gonna move on to materials now. I use blue-green foam for just about everything. Different widths for different things, like the 1/2 inch, for example, is really good for walls, or if you just want a thin base for a hill or something like that. The 2 inch is probably my favorite though. You get the most use out of this. You could use it for chunks of rock or just to build up a tall base. Like if you want to do a really tall hill or something, you go for the 2 inch. You could use the pink foam or the white foam. It all comes down to preference though. I think the blue-green, it's a little denser. It's definitely smoother when you cut it. Holds detail better. It's more durable. The pink stuff and the white stuff flake. The white foam being the guiltiest of that. The pink stuff just kind of comes off in chunks, whereas the white stuff, if you've ever opened up a new TV out of the box, you've seen all the little white pieces of foam all around your living room floor. That's what's gonna happen if you use that. Same as this, but it's a lot easier to clean up. So I prefer the blue-green in all different sizes. It's typically about $18 for a 4 foot by 8 foot sheet at a hardware store. A 2-inch sheet's about 36 or so. I think a half-inch 4-foot by 8-foot sheet is $12, I believe. So I usually just go to the hardware store, cut them down in the parking lot so I can fit them in my car in a smaller sheets, and that usually keeps me supplied with foam for years. Just one trip to the hardware store. All that foam gets glued down to, I think this is a 1/8 or 16th of an inch sheet of MDF hardwood, cut to the shape of whatever we want the base to be. For this, I use the razor I had out earlier, but you could also use a jigsaw, and it's probably safer and easier to use a jigsaw if you have one. I use Gorilla Glue to stick the foam to the wood base, as well as foam to foam or foam to plastic, foam to anything. This stuff's amazing. This is essentially expanding foam, and it will actually push up from underneath. So when we put some foam down on a board here with the glue underneath, if we don't use a vise or something heavy on top, the foam will push it up in some weird angle. And so you always want to make sure you reinforce it when you're using the Gorilla Glue. Another way to do that, I have some bamboo skewers. These are usually like $2 or $1 at the grocery store, or the dollar store. Some toothpicks. One method I've begun using is, it's kind of like rebar, I guess. If you have 2 pieces of foam and you put some Gorilla Glue in between there, the Gorilla Glue will push up on it, but we don't want that to happen. So we push in bamboo skewers, toothpicks at all weird different angles like this. And that prevents it from ever moving. And then once the Gorilla Glue's all cured, just come back and snip this off. Leave the toothpicks and bamboo skewers in there forever. I mean, it just makes it stronger, sturdier. I mean, it's holding together without glue. So imagine if we put some expanding foam Gorilla Glue on there. Once we have our foam and whatever else we're using, wood, glued to our base, we want to spackle it. Sand it first if need be, but you want to spackle it. I used a lightweight spackle compound. I think it's like a vinyl putty, but you can feel the difference when you go to the hardware store. This is mostly empty, but it is very lightweight. If you're not sure which one this is at the hardware store, when you're shopping, first of all, it's Fast and Final is the brand I use, but if you can't find that, it's the one that's completely less weight than all the other spackles. Those are almost like a bag of concrete, how much they weigh. It's ridiculous. They're like 20 pounds. This big gallon thing of spackle is pretty light. I mean, it's about as light as the foam, I'd say. So we use our spackle knife to fill in any gaps on the piece we've made. Sand it down. You might have to do a few layers between spackling, sanding, spackling again to get it as smooth or, you know, whatever texture you're going for. Remember the rock, you could always go back, cut bits away. So once you had that looking right, now it's time for texture. And with texture, you could use some sawdust, a little PVA glue sawdust. This is a clay product. You could also use unscented kitty litter or anything like that. This just adds different grades of texture, which will look great once you put some paint over it. We usually put that at the base of rocks or, you know, at rubble or anything that's crumbled. Once we have the texture glued down with the PVA glue, we want to let that dry completely, and then maybe 2 or 3 coats of some cheap craft store acrylic paint. This is like a latex acrylic. It's like 50 cents at Walmart. This is Apple Barrel. It's under the Plaid company is the name of it. They're really cheap. They make a lot of different colors. I normally wouldn't use this for miniature painting, but for terrain, when you're painting something this huge, I mean, you could do a 4-foot by 8-foot table. If you use Citadel or Vallejo paints, that's gonna be a very expensive painting process. So it's okay to use these, and honestly, you're gonna wanna use some aerosol spray paint on your foam at some point. And if you've ever spray painted foam, you know what happens. It eats the foam. So I use the acrylic latex paint, cheap craft store stuff, just to coat the entire piece of foam. And that way, by the time we hit it with some spray paint, it's completely covered, it's completely insulated, it won't be eaten up by the spray paint. And as I'm painting, I usually work my way from dark to light, just like you do with miniatures. I buy cheap brushes, like at Walmart or a craft store. You can get a big bag of cheap brushes that are gonna fall apart at some point, but it's like $5 for a whole bag. Get all different sizes. You paint terrain a lot differently than you do miniatures. You do a lot broader strokes, more implied detail. But once we have the craft paint on top of the texture pieces, or the texture bits, it really cements in any sawdust or dirt or grit or anything you're putting on there with PVA glue. It cements it on there. It makes it a little bit sturdier, and it holds up to any painting you're gonna do. Once you're happy with how the thing's painted, there's a stage at the end, I call it detailing. This is when you put things, you're gluing stuff onto the terrain that you're not gonna paint after that. These are final details. Stuff like flock or plants, trees, foliage. I'm gonna show you a few different types. It depends on what you're doing. You don't need all of this. I would first figure out what the first project's gonna be, and decide what you need from there, and just build up your collection of terrain materials based on that. This is lichen. It's actually lichen from a tree. It's been treated by some processes, boiled in some kind of glycerin. I'm not a chemist, but it's preserved. I mean, it smells like a natural product, but you use that for basically bushes or any kind of heavy foliage on a terrain piece. And I usually store it in a jar. It will dry out. So you don't want to keep it moist, but you want to keep, yeah, I guess you want to keep it moist, don't you? So keep it in a jar. Just don't add water to it, if you understand what I'm saying. We have some flock. Woodland Scenics makes flock. We make our own flock here. It's basically a really fine green texture. It doesn't necessarily have to be green. You can do like browns or whatever, but this is supposed to be short grass, just a little bit of undergrowth maybe. And you apply that with the PVA glue as well. Let's keep a little bit of static grass on hand, just to do a little clump or two, just to show that we have an extra material. But if you're a miniature painter, you know all about static grass, and all the same rules apply. You use a static grass applicator, and just attach it to the terrain piece with a little bit of PVA glue. And then some clump foliage. This stuff is, it's kind of like the cushions in your car seats, I guess, if you were to rip that up into little tiny pieces. But it's been dyed all different shades of green. This would be like under a bush or under some kind of foliage. This is the stuff that would look really good under that. It's just an extra texture. And if we were to take glue and make kind of a line out of hot glue, for example, and just kind of stack this on top, this is how you would make a vine or some kudzu or something. Just a piece at a time. You kind of make it branch out. See, as you go, it starts to look kind of like a vine. I mean, if we were gluing it. And we have trees here. I wanted to show you some Bachmann trees. Bachmann makes these pine trees. I think pine trees are very difficult to get in scale. Bachmann kind of has these weird little like straw noodles when you look at it up close, but for whatever reason, in 28mm scale, this is perfect. Feel free to look around online for any retailers that sell trees you like. If you find something you like, just go with that. Trees take forever to make. by hand. I always outsource my trees from model railroad stores, or there's a few companies in China that have some modeling supplies like this. Another option is going to the craft store to the fake plant section. This might not look like much. It comes on this weird little sheets. You might not even be thinking of it for terrain, but always try and think outside of the scale that it is currently in. I guess this is for like some kind of floral thing you would do on a, I don't know, your dining room table or something. But if you start to break it down, little individual pieces, that right there is some kind of shrub, some kind of jungle shrub or something. You poke a little hole into some foam with a toothpick, put a little bit of Gorilla Glue on that, a little bit of moisture so it starts to cure, and then you stick that into the foam. Jungle trees, easy. Finally, I heard you're interested in Christmas displays. This is the best snow. There's a lot of tutorials that'll say how to use baking powder or like baking soda, things like that. Pretty much everything else will yellow over time. It'll start to collect little bits of dust. It won't look like snow forever. This stuff is kind of like, it's some kind of micropolymer. I think it's the stuff they use in diapers and tampons and stuff like that. It's really great for snow. You take a little bit of white paint, craft acrylic paint like we were using before, and go 50-50 with PVA glue and just kind of put it on in patches and just sprinkle this on. Make sure you do it in layers. Try not to do it all at once because you will see the brush strokes otherwise. If you put it on in layers, it kind of hides the brush strokes and it just looks like snow the way it falls. So hopefully you get some holiday ideas with this. This is 12 or 14 bucks for a whole container here. You can't really reuse it because it's white. And like I said, it does get dirty if you try to reuse it. But yeah, those are the essentials. Primer, I forgot to show you this. It really doesn't matter what kind of spray primer you use, as long as you've completely coated your foam with acrylic latex paint first. And you'll find the foam is very absorbent, so you can't really over prime with this stuff once you've completely covered it in acrylic. The foam will hold detail no matter what, so yeah, just make sure it's thoroughly covered in acrylic and you should be okay to spray with the aerosol. If you have any other questions, you can message us at info@WhiteMetalGames or terrain@WhiteMetalGames, and we have more videos online in the building block series showing how to make terrain from the ground up the Bryan Paul Rees way. Peace, guys.